Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. David Graves, an experienced biblical archaeologist and CEO of Electronic Christian Media. I'm here today with another exciting episode on our Archaeology Discoveries channel, where we discuss important archaeological artifacts related to the Bible. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. George Sparks, host of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Today, I got my guest, Dr. David Graves, PhD. Let me get my fancy phone out right here. Dr. Graves received his PhD from Aberdeen University in Scotland. He has been involved in teaching the Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years. He has taught at Oxford University, England, Liberty University School of Divinity, has provided tours of the Ashmolean as well as the British museums, traveled extensively in the Middle East, has been involved in the Mount Ararat research. He has also excavated at Qumran, the Temple Mount, and Shiloh in Israel, as well as Tel El Hammam in Jordan, in Tel El Hammam for over 10 years. It's been over 10 or 15. How long have you been there? And of course, you were my dig supervisor. Everybody needs to know that. He has been involved in excavating the Dead Sea Scroll caves and has authored many books as well as publications. Welcome to the program, Dr. David Graves, and today we're going to talk about ancient synagogues.
Good to be with you, George. Yeah,
well,
just to clarify, Tel El Hammam, they excavated there for 15 years in Jordan, and I was able to be with them for 10 of those seasons, working there on the ground. So not in a row. They, I was there on season 1, and I excavated through many seasons. A couple of them I had to bow out because of health reasons and other issues, but did get in 10 of the 15 and part of the crew there. And so we're going to talk about synagogues today, some of them that I visited over the years, and the importance.
Right. Well, we started off the other day talking about issues in the Jewish representations, and so we thought, hey, today we're going to talk about synagogues, and you're going to stay tuned, folks, because there's avenues, areas in the synagogues such as the Bema, the Moses seat, and we want to get into little aspects of ancient synagogues as well. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I can see that this is the ancient synagogue in Capernaum, I believe, that you're behind you today. And if you ever been to Capernaum and in your itinerary trips to Israel, then you probably visited this location. I'm not going to give away too much. Then I have some artifacts to share along the way, since we're going to be somewhere between synagogues. Maybe we're going to be in the 1st century, and maybe we're going to be throughout almost the Byzantine era. We'll find out today, folks. So, Dr. Graves, you have a PowerPoint you want to bring us into?
Yeah, I'll share my screen here, and we can get started.
Let me see. I'm going to move this out of the way.
There we go. So we're going to talk about the synagogues today, and they're known as the house of prayer. That's the etymology of the word. So let's take a look at some of the houses of prayer. And the material in this presentation is found in my book on the archaeology of the New Testament. It's pictured here on the left. If you want to go to the QR codes, scan those, you'll take you to the books on Amazon, or also all the books on my in my library. Okay.
Well, so you got the menorah right here. Was the menorah in a synagogue?
Sometimes they were displayed in the synagogue. A lot of times it was iconology. Whether there was one there in the synagogue is really known, but there's a lot of reliefs and pictures of them in the ancient synagogues, also in the mosaic floors.
Now, I don't want to sidetrack too much, but last week we talked about the Arch of Titus. Is this the menorah from the Arch of Titus? Is that the design of that?
Yes, it is. So this is the
Okay.
one that you'd find in Rome that was carried off from the temple in 70 AD. So this is what it would have looked like, and I've just put it here in the foreground
Oh,
here as well.
I was just thinking that, it wasn't Herod's temple, then it was taken to Rome. We know that because of the Arch of Titus, which we discussed last week. That should be up pretty soon, folks. And now it's in a synagogue. So I was curious.
Yes. Well, this is an AI image in the background.
I know, I'm just teasing.
Yeah, I just put it here in the foreground to make it look pretty. And this is the Theodosius inscription here on the left. And we're going to talk about that here in a moment. So again, my books that deal with this, the Archaeology of the New Testament, the History of Biblical Archaeology deals with some of the archaeologists who did some of the excavations at these synagogues. So the word in Greek is synagogue. Comes from two words in Greek, sun, meaning together, and goge, meaning learning or training. So it means learning or training together. The Hebrew means Beit Knesset. Now you'll know the word Knesset because that is the government building in Israel today. It's the Knesset. It's the house of assembly. And the other Hebrew word is Beit Tiflia, meaning house of prayer. And that's generally the one that is associated with the idea of synagogue. Now, it's important because of Matthew 4:23, and then he, or Jesus, went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So synagogues played an important role in the life of Jesus. You'll also remember that in Paul's missionary journeys, he always visited the synagogue, usually first. So he starts talking there, and then he would go out into the community. So synagogues played a very important role in the New Testament, both in the life of and ministry of Jesus as well as the ministry of Paul. So they're worthy of investigation. You can see here an aerial view of the synagogue at Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. Critical scholars argue that the synagogues were not established until after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. There's only one problem with that. We've excavated and found 10 synagogues at least that existed before AD 70. So that archaeology kind of destroys the critical scholars' earlier views that these things didn't exist during that period. Hard to dispute the dating on them. It's estimated that their archaeologists have discovered at least 100 synagogues just in Palestine or Israel alone. And there's about 20 of them, probably more now, because every year as they dig at a new site, from the diaspora, or the area of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, Rome, Italy, North Africa. So we've discovered synagogues in those areas. We'll present a few of them. Now, this is an important inscription, the Theodotus inscription, a limestone slab. It was discovered in Jerusalem by a guy by the name of Wheel in 1913, and south of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. That's what the picture behind here would be around this area. That's the southwest corner. The significance of it is the earliest known evidence of a synagogue building in the region of Palestine or in Jerusalem. And it has the word that's used by Mark, chapter 5, archaeosynagogues. That's the Greek word for the leader of the synagogue. Every synagogue had a leader, sort of the chief or the individual who led in the synagogue. And that was an important position for Jewish worship. It describes a certain Theodotus as the leader, the head of the synagogue here in Jerusalem. It dates to the pre-destruction Jerusalem period, pre-70 AD. So it existed before Jerusalem fell by the Romans. We already looked at some of that with the Arch of Titus and the menorah that was carried off in that after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans. But this inscription existed before that. So it was there when the Romans showed up. It dates to pre-destruction, makes it the earliest known inscription and thus evidence for synagogues in Palestine at that time. Here's the translation of it. Theodotus, son of Vetanus, priest, an archaeosynagogue, son of an archaeosynagogue, grandson of an archaeosynagogue. So this was a long reign in the family of someone who was the leader in the synagogue, sort of passed down from father to son through many generations. And he rebuilt the synagogue for the reading of the law and the teaching of the commandments, and the hostelry rooms and the baths for the lodging of those who have need abroad. So when people traveled, they could lodge there. And it was established by his forefathers, the elders in Synagogues. And so that's what the inscription states and translates as. So it gives us a glimpse into the use of these synagogues, not just for the reading of the law and teaching of the law, but also as a place, as a hostel where you could go and stay overnight and have lodging here in Jerusalem, because you're coming to visit people, friends, family, but also you wanted to go up to the temple to do your sacrifices and to worship. The first one we're going to take a look at in probably more detail is the one at Capernaum. Now, this is an important one. We're going to take a look at Chorazin, Gamla, Tiberias, Hamat Tiberias, and Herodium and Masada. Herodium and Masada were two that were built probably by Herod the Great, and then used by his sons. And then the one at Beshian, which is kind of interesting, with the zodiac. So those are the ones that I'm going to highlight in Israel. Of the 100 that could be highlighted, these are the sort of the ones that stand out to me, and I wanted to focus on them. Chorazin and Capernaum are up here in the north around Galilee. Then Herodium down here in the south. Masada down in the south. These are the ones for Herod the Great. And then Gamla is up here in Galilee and Tiberias. So a lot of them are excavated around Galilee. And of course, we know Jesus visited these sites. Capernaum means the town of Nahum, and dates from the 1st century all the way through to the Byzantine period. It was first connected with Tel Hum by Robinson, and then also by Charles Wilson, who made the final identification in 1866. So it was sort of known from 1838. And then the Franciscans, they carried out excavations in 1921 to 26. And Corbo and Lafrida, they carried out excavations in 1968 to 86 under the direction of Basilius, the person in charge of the IA, the Israeli Antiquities Authority. So it has a long history, the Franciscans primarily, and they have a little sort of like a monastery, an office area that is on site. But it was the one used by Jesus, the synagogue, to teach miracles. Now, it's not the one that we see here, the white synagogue, that was the one from the first century, and we'll talk and explain that in a moment. And then there's also Peter's house, which it's another archaeological remain on the site. We're just going to talk about the synagogue today. This is the aerial view from what it looks like from the Sea of Galilee back. Here's another aerial. There's the Franciscan building there. And there we have the synagogue. And what's believed to be underneath of this, looks like a flying saucer, but underneath was Peter's house. And then these are the residential areas. So it's an important site. And while the present structure of the Capernaum synagogue dates to the Byzantine period, that's the 4th century AD, excavations have revealed an earlier 1st century basalt stone wall that dates to the time of Jesus. And that would be what it's sitting on. So under the foundation is a basalt earlier 1st century structure. The date was confirmed based on about 10,000 bronze coins and pottery from under the basalt wall and the floor. Here we have a picture of it, close up. It's a beautiful example with reconstruction up here. We have a modern beam holding it, securing it. This is the reconstruction of what it would have looked like in the 1st century. You'll notice that there's no seats or benches. There's some benches around the outside perimeter, but they can stand here in the center while they do the reading of the law. And there would have been a 2nd story up top. Now, William F. Albright, a famous archaeologist, said, and I wasn't able to locate the date that he said this, but he states, "It is a pity that no earlier remains have yet been discovered. It is by no means unlikely that there are foundations of an older synagogue under the ruins of the 3rd century synagogue of Capernaum. But no one is likely to pull down this splendid structure on the chance of finding inferior remains beneath it." Now, he was very skeptical about someone doing that. Well, guess what? They did do that. And so here we have excavations of the synagogue, of the walled synagogue from the 4th century, reveals that it rested on the foundation of a 1st century black basalt synagogue. So Albright was wrong again. He's got it wrong with the identification of Sodom, and he's got it wrong here with his predictions of what would they'd find in this synagogue here. So here you can see the trench that the Franciscans had built in the 1930s. And this is the plate. It's now on the church, the late 4th century white synagogue built upon the remains of the synagogue of Jesus. And you can see the basalt here, that foundation underneath of it that it was built on. So the 1975 discovery of the black basalt walls, so in 75 they dug down. Albright said they would never do that, but they did, and they found it. 4 feet thick. In 1981, the basalt cobblestone floor was dated to the 1st century from the pottery and from the coinage that was found underneath.
Hey, David, before you go on, could you go back to that picture again? Yeah. They're pointing down here, the sign, the late 4th century synagogue, which would be right up here. You can't tell, but that's the white synagogue, right? I don't know if you can see my cursor. You probably can't.
No, I can't. But
Now
this above the arrow, the red arrow, that above is the white synagogue that was built on top of the basalt foundation in the first century underneath of it. So all that remains is all that we see here is the white synagogue on top of the basalt, which is the black stone that was built on top of that first century synagogue. So it had been rebuilt and restructured in the later period.
Okay. I got another question because here's, like you said, the red arrow is pointing to the first century synagogue.
Yeah.
So the second synagogue is quite a bit higher, possibly, than the first century synagogue.
Mhm.
And then outside of that, you can see to the right, outside are the ruins of earlier Capernaum on the cutout. You see, and
Oh,
I'm
right
just
here.
wondering, yeah, you think that's the same level as the Black Synagogue?
Well, they've excavated this St. Peter's house.
Uh-huh.
I've got a whole display on that. That's a different structure, and they do identify some of the structure in Peter's house with the basalt down to the first century.
Okay.
So that
And
would be
then
the same time period as the first century foundation of this synagogue they built on top of.
Mhm. Now to the right of that black arrow, is that a pavement right there? Is that a street, a road?
Right here,
Yeah.
no, that's underneath of that basalt foundation, I believe, because this is outside the wall
Okay.
of the synagogue. So it may be this area right here. I'm not certain where
Okay.
that shot
Anyway,
was taken.
I know I'm off subject, so I apologize.
What's important is that, you have buildings built on top of each other, and they would use the old foundations. We found that at Tel El Hammam when we had the bath complex. The Romans built their bath complex and put the foundation of their wall on top of the middle bronze wall that already existed. Why do you do that? Because you've already got yourself a good, firm foundation, to build on. So why build another one when you already have one there? Now, this is the home. Capernaum was the home of Jesus during his ministry, which is an important fact to remember. And he was living with Simon Peter. And Jesus was teaching and healing in the synagogue. So it would have been the synagogue that was under this one. So this is not the synagogue in which Jesus taught. It's the synagogue that was rebuilt on top of the one that Jesus taught in. So be careful with how you define that. When you're there with your tourist guide and he tells you that this was the synagogue in which Jesus taught and did his ministry, it's not the actual one. It's the one underneath of it. But this is what it would have looked like, later. And it's the only synagogue in Capernaum. Some sites have actually two synagogues. We're going to look at one of those in a moment. But likely built by the Roman centurion mentioned in the Gospels in Luke 7, verses 1 through 5. And here we have Luke talking about it. After he had finished all of his sayings and the hearings of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue." And so the white one may have been built in the first century by the centurions on top of the basalt one. So we know it had been rebuilt at some point. Here's a menorah, fragment of the Byzantine capital from the synagogue. And We talked about the menorahs in our last podcast. If you want to go back and learn more about these, you'll notice here they have the base is like a three-pronged base. Here is some of the capital work. And this is probably the Ark of the Covenant being represented here in this one. There's a close-up of it. And then we move from Capernaum to our next one, at Chorazin. And it's mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. And this one is built with the black basalt. You can see it's quite dark, not like the white limestone at Capernaum. And we're going to talk about the seat of Moses, which is discovered here in our next podcast. And it's from Chorazin. So that's its kind of claim to fame. Another one is the synagogue at Gamla, up here around Galilee. And you can sort of see it's on a hillside and flat laid out. You can see some seats around the exterior where people could sit, and the pillars, a very common layout. Here are some of the iconography found at the third synagogue was found here at Gamla, probably built between AD 23 and AD 41. And again, more pictures of the menorahs, again with a three sort of tripod style base. And one on the capital on this pillar, and then the Star of David on this one. Looks like that might be on the floor. Then we go to another one, Hamat Tiberias. I thought I had deleted that. That shouldn't be there. I'm going to talk about Priena in a few moments. The site was rediscovered in 1920 when a road was placed through here for construction. You can see the structure of it here, and part of it is under a building to protect it because they have a beautiful mosaic. In 1925, this is what it looked like, the thermal baths that we have here around the Sea of Galilee. And it was built in 3 stages without any change to the shape and the size of the main hall. First built in 2050 AD, the main period of occupation was in the 4th and 5th century, with a third period of use in the 10th to 11th century. And whether that was a synagogue is unclear, being so late. There's a limestone menorah that's found on this location as well. It's in the Israel Museum. I didn't put a photo up of it. And then the inscribed chair of Moses was found in the eastern aisle at Tiberias. So we have the chair of Moses we'll talk about next week in the synagogue in Tiberias, as well as the one at Chorazin, and there's also another one at I believe it's Priena. This is the mosaic floor, beautiful mosaic floor. We have a wall running through the center of a zodiac. So part of the floor in the synagogue with the 2 menorahs is a mosaic of a image of a zodiac. And there are 2 synagogues at this site. One with this mosaic and another one that doesn't have that. The context in which they were built is that Tiberias became the seat of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court of religious law. And from AD 193 to the late 4th century, when Emperor Theodosius I prohibited its activity. The later phase was from the 4th century. So here's a close-up of the, you can see the menorah here with those 3 legs, like a tripod type leg. So this is how they pictured it in the menorah. So, and there's the some of the utensils used for removing the ash, and the shofar for blowing the horn. You can see it lit up here with the way it's pictured. There's a close-up of the menorah. It was excavated by Moshe Dayan and Dothan, and Judy Dothan. This is his daughter, and this is her father, 1961 to 63. They are both prominent archaeologists in their own right. I have a whole section in my book on the history of biblical archaeology on both of them. It's noted for its elaborate mosaic floor and the earliest mosaic pavement found in a synagogue, which is another claim to fame. You can see here how they have patched up and repaired where that wall had gone through in the earlier photograph. This beautiful mosaic of the zodiac, the Hebrew above each of the. So you have a syncretism of the astrology mixed with Roman elements, mixed with the Jewish elements here on the floor of this synagogue. I'm just going to rush on to the next one here, the intertestamental period. This is the fortress of Masada. This is the Dead Sea, not the Sea of Galilee. And we have a fortification on top of a mountain. And the red here is where the synagogue was excavated and unearthed. So he moved down to the southern part of the Dead Sea. And here we have this fortification. For 2 years, the Romans set up camp below it and built a ramp up top to take this fortification where the Jewish zealots were hiding after the conquered Jerusalem. Jebus here, or Jerusalem. And the Jewish zealots ran down to the Dead Sea, past Qumran, likely hid some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then they come down to En-Gedi and then down to Masada. And they hold up there on their fort for 2 years. If you ever get a chance to see the movie called Masada, I highly recommend it. It's an excellent movie. And they tell the story. The Bible speaks of the deliverance of God's deliverance of the Israelites from their enemies and their miraculous victory over them. May have been a prediction of what would take place here. But there's a beautiful aerial shot. And there's the Masada synagogue. You can see those seats along the outside right here. And the pillars again. And that's where it's located. So this is the synagogue of Alexander Jannaeus of 78 BC. And the later one of Ben Yair in 66 to 73 AD. So I mentioned this is the great standoff. They held them off for 2 years of the siege, and then they finally broke through. And spoiler alert, all of the Jews, when they came through the gate, had committed suicide. So after the breach of the wall, the Jews they didn't want to give themselves up to the Romans, so they committed suicide. This is a nice shot of it, courtesy of the Maiden Project. See how it's all the seats go all the way around. Photograph of it when I was there. Somebody's sitting here on the benches around the outside. And it's important because 2 texts, Deuteronomy and Ezekiel, were buried in the ground under the floor of the Zealot synagogue at Masada. They may have been trying to hide that from the Romans coming in, or evidence of a practice of Geniza. That's where the Jews would preserve corrupt texts. They wouldn't destroy them. They would hide them in a sacred spot. That can also be the same argument that could be made with some of the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts in those caves. Hid from the Romans, but also used, placed there by the scribes that may have had a mistake on them. They wouldn't destroy the scroll. They would hide it and preserve it and put it in a sacred place. It's good news for us because we have all these corrupted texts that help us with our textual criticism. And so several of the scriptural texts, many of them found here at Masada, were found in the living quarters, indicating the reading and studying of scripture also took place outside of the temple setting. So they were reading their scriptures at home, not just in the temple. Another important artifact from Masada was the ostracon bearing the name of Ben Yair, short from Eleazar Ben Yair, the leader of the Zealots. And there it is right there. And what they did is they broke up pieces of pottery, they write their names on it, and it's believed that these were put in a pot, and then the Zealots would pick out their names as to who would be the ones to kill their fellow Jews on the last night before the Romans came through the wall. And we have the name actually of the leader on one of them. And so the advice that Gamaliel has given us in Acts chapter 5 proves true with the fall of Masada. If it is of God, you'll not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So they took his advice. So some suggest there's some sort of prophecy that is mentioned in Acts dealing with this. The other famous synagogue is called the Beth Alpha Synagogue in Beit Shean in Israel. And we have another zodiac on this one, which is kind of interesting. And some inscriptions and some pictures of the menorah. Here's a reconstruction of what their synagogues would have looked like. Pillars, and they had a roof and a hallway inside. So here we have the menorah, zodiac. Here we have that. This one's got the triad. Here we have three different bottoms to two different menorahs. So this one's pictured a little different than the other one, but again, gives us an idea what they look like. And here we have one of the synagogues at Beth Shemesh. Or then there's a bunch of synagogues outside of Israel that were there during the diaspora. There's a famous one at Sardis. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm just going to mention these ones. When I was at Prieni, in Asia Minor, we won there. This may or may not be the seat of Moses. Ostia in Italy and Delos in Greece. So some 20 outside of Israel that have been identified. Probably the most famous is this one here in Sardis. So lots of synagogues, both inside and outside of Israel. And here's the one at Priena. They said this may or may not be the seat of Moses, but it was part of the synagogue itself at Priena. It's not mentioned in the Bible, but it's an important site. Some beautiful, beautiful theater, but we have a synagogue there. This is believed to be one of the oldest synagogues in the world, the oldest synagogue in Europe, and the oldest mainstream Jewish synagogues. So this is one here. And that's my general survey of some of the synagogues, both inside and outside of Israel. Maybe we'll do a podcast sometime in the future on the ones outside. Any questions, George, on
Yeah, it's all really interesting. I mean, all the different synagogues and the constructions. That one behind you, Capernaum, built on the basalt synagogue that dates from the time period popular, just say the time of Jesus.
yes.
And if that's the case, which many scholars believe it is, that would be the synagogue where he performed the miracles. And then he would lift the synagogue, and where we saw that little looked like a little spaceship over top of Peter's house. Um, you think he would have left the synagogue and maybe walked down the road and then went into Peter's house, and then we have evidence, or in the scriptures, I should say, where it says that the people amassed themselves around the house of Peter to the point where to get to see Jesus, they had to remove the roof. Remember that one? Tear
Yeah.
apart the roof. I always imagine, like the disciples, they're there in the same room with Jesus, or maybe a few of them outside to talk to the crowd. Okay, you can go next, and maybe you can go next, and while they're in there with Jesus and he's performing or talking or performing miracles, somebody starts ripping apart the room, the roof, and in the excavation there, the Franciscan excavation of the house of Peter, I think the evidence showed that it was what we call an insula. There were rooms built onto another room, built onto another room. So extensions of a house. It had to be large because there was Jesus and his 12 disciples staying there. You think it has to be large enough to what do you want to say, to hold all the disciples and the visitors, or what was going on. So it had to be quite large.
Well, George, we could do a whole podcast on the House of Jesus. I have a whole presentation on that. That what I call a flying saucer is actually a Roman Catholic church,
right?
And it's designed like that because the building is octagon, so it looks like that, and you can look through the floor and see it. We could do a podcast on that sometime.
Have you ever been in, or do you have to be Catholic to go in there?
I've been inside. Yes, you can go in.
No, I'd never been in. When I was there, it's always closed.
No, I was able to get in, take photos, and see it. And I have some photos from before they built the church, so you can see the details of the structure. And there's been a lot of graffiti and a lot of indication that this site was venerated after Jesus and Peter were there. So that would be an interesting podcast sometime.
That would be. I always have an imagination. When you read the Bible, sometimes you put in your own imagination what it might have been like if you were there. Yes. And I was thinking, like, when they were tearing apart the roof of Peter's house,
right?
That I could just imagine, like Peter being quite the shock, because actually I think it's his mother-in-law's house. This was his mother-in-law gets healed there. So maybe he married into that family. It's just to suppose. And since he was, maybe the man of the house, that became traditionally, I guess, his house. But, just thinking off the top of my head. So here's this house that dates back into the BC time period. So it's been in the family for quite a long time. And now somebody's removing the roof. So that might be quite the shock for Peter. And I can imagine somebody saying to Peter, "Hey, Peter, can you believe they're tearing off your roof, man?" And Peter would look at one of the other disciples and say, "Yeah, that's why tomorrow he's going to be at your house." But I've never been in that. I call it, most people do call it the spaceship, and it isn't a Catholic church or whatever. I've never been in it. And
I've got photos from inside, and it's quite interesting that it's been built. The house has been built and rebuilt and added to and venerated, and so it's been a spot of veneration for a very, very long time. But the Franciscans have found a lot of materials from the first century. Just like the synagogue had been rebuilt as well, and they built on top of it. They did the same thing with the houses. So I guess what surprises me is how sort of tiny this fishing village really is when you look at the aerial photographs. And there's probably more archaeology on the outside area that hasn't been excavated yet.
Right. Well, another synagogue that I think is really fascinating is the one I seen from a distance. I'd always wanted to go there is Gamla, but from the road it's quite the hike. And the time that I went there, I actually had a raincoat on and some binoculars so I could see Gamla from, I was in the Golan area. So the Golan's looking down at Gamla. Of course, there's a nice story to it. I think, who was the archaeologist? I think it was a guy called Guptaman or something like that.
I don't
And
remember.
they found the first it's a type of Jewish revolt shekel that is unique to Gamla. And I think there's only like 2 or 3 that have ever been found.
Okay.
So they got the same design as the first Jewish revolt shekel, except they're very crude. And they only found them at Gamla. Now, for people that know their first revolt history, Josephus records the siege of Gamla. And many people died there, like thousands died at Gamla. And they call it the Masada of the North.
Okay.
And not only that, I think it's also one of the earliest synagogues in today, what we might call in Israel.
Galilee
is the
area.
one that's in Gamla. So people actually make pilgrimages to that early synagogue and have their because in some cases have weddings, have marriage. I always wanted to go there. I think the story of Gamla is very fascinating. It was rediscovered. It was a site that has not been found for it kind of like your Livius.
Yes.
Like you're discovering Livius. Gamla was rediscovered. And it was, I think the story went is the guy that did the excavation was on one of a boat in Galilee. And from the description of Jesus, he looked in that area and said it must be that direction because the word Gamla means camel hump. And it looks like a hump because it stands on its own hill. It's a city built on the side of a hill. And so much that the houses were built over top of each other. So the floor of one house, the roof of one house becomes the floor of another. And it climbs up this. Always wanted to be there, but I never got the chance. And that's a remarkable place to visit because also if you visit Gamla, and if you had the time, then you could go visit Masada. Okay, because that's the 2 places of, you could say, of a Roman siege. I think the wall that they tore down at Gamla dated back actually to the early Bronze Age.
Okay.
So I know I'm rambling on, but I just think these are 2 fantastic sites when we just think, okay, there's much more that went on in some of these areas than we can say the synagogue. I just think of the events surrounding the synagogue. At this time, if you don't mind, let me throw in some artifacts. I don't know if I still got enough juice left on this because we use olive oil to light. And I think my olive oil, but this is like if you were going to excavate and you thought you're in a Jewish area, their lamps are going to be, if I can light this, and maybe it's going to light there. There you go. Happy birthday. Oh, it went out. Okay. But anyway, everybody gets the idea. But it's very plain, right? Because the Jews had that commandment, no graven images. That raises the question, why do we have the zodiac in a synagogue with the center of it? It looks like, what is his name? Zul or something riding the chariot? But you've seen this, definitely the zodiac.
Yeah, well, it's
What's
definitely
that doing in the synagogue with all the images?
Yeah, I know.
That puzzles me. Okay. And then you talked about the uniqueness, of course.
And at Sardis, we also have a lion image, little statue of a lion. And then on the altar itself, we have the eagle on the side.
Yeah.
So we have this Roman iconology on top of, in a Jewish synagogue. So there was a lot of syncretism going on. We have this idea that everything is very, very sterile, and all the Jews were, perfectly obeying all of the laws, and everything was the way that the Bible, kind of describes. But of course, we know the prophets were talking about how they had brought in their pagan ideas, the pagan religion into Judaism. So it's not as cut and dried as we might make it out to be, even in the New Testament period, with the use of the icons in the zodiac. Because we're got two of the synagogues, so it was a popular theme.
Right. Yeah, that's right. There's a shady area there.
Yeah.
And not only that,
they
are conquered people, and the coins they use, you can't see this, but this is a half shekel and a denarii, because they would use their oil lamps also to store coins. And that's been found also in Israel, locations where they found lamps, and then they found coins in the lamps.
George, so I store some of my coins in my oil lamps today, even.
Yeah, so
why not?
But the coins that were actually circulated in the temple, the Herodian temple, were the shekel of Tyre, and that had, I think, the image of milk cart on it, right? Those had images. You think they would say, "Oh no, we can't have that image of that coin with an image of a foreign deity on it"? Not in our temple, but they did.
Well, we have the same kind of thing happening in Christianity today as well, where we have a lot of syncretism going on with all the entertainment and bringing
the world. We showed this last
together.
time too, so there you go. A menorah. Look how many. This one's got more than a tripod. This is like a tripod. What is this? You can't tell if it's upside down or not.
Oh, I know. That's for the dyslexic people.
Other implements that are used in the synagogue, such as we're going to talk about the Moses seat.
Yep.
That could be one. But also there was a place where they would keep the scrolls, and it was called the Ark, like the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Now, so they would have a closet. We'll just call it a Torah closet. But symbolically, they would call it an ark, like a religious descendant, as a place where the law was kept. Just like we think of the Ark of the Covenant.
They sometimes call it the Torah chest.
The Torah chest. And what's interesting, and I think Indiana Jones, when they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant, I think it was like 1981, that movie, Search for the Ark or Raiders of the Ark. That was the same year that Carol and Eric Myers discovered the remnants of a Torah closet. I think it was made of limestone. I don't know if you remember that article. All right, people, thanks for joining us in this little episode of Visiting Synagogues. And be sure to tell your friends, like, subscribe, and join us next time. So thank you very much.